I always wanted to be a teacher when I started school.
We're here for the students and we want what's best for the student.
And I love watching people learn.
Your teacher, student, academics, curriculum, whatever, that center post, the one that keeps this education together.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Last Best Learning podcast, a podcast designed for Montana's educators, where our mission is to deliver digestible and relevant professional learning that honors our educators' capacity in an increasingly busy world. Our state educators empower minds, elevate futures, and inspire self-discovery, and we get to walk beside them in that work.
As we stated in our orientation episode, we are determining what to discuss based on the data that we've gathered from the field. We are pleased to prioritize addressing educator self-care in this episode of the podcast in response to that data. Today, we have invited an esteemed expert from the field, Mr. John Sommers-Flanagan, who works with the Montana Happiness Project to help create a world where people listen to and value one another while also living lives that are personally meaningful and saturated with happiness. Can you remind us where we did leave off last time, Katrina?
Yeah, so last episode, we left off with a quote by Katie Reed, which states, "Self-care means giving the world the best of you instead of just what's left of you." And we asked listeners to consider how they continue to give their students their best while preserving their mental health and personal health. Michelle, what's one thing that you did that helped you in that when you were teaching in the classroom?
I remember that I got to the point where, and I worked with my district principal for this, to come in early at 6:30 to maintain my contract hours so that I could leave at 3:30 so that I could be home with my kids. So I had to set those boundaries.
Boundaries are very important. And we're looking forward to exploring that a little bit more with John today. John, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Could you please spend a few minutes visiting with us about your path that brought you to who you are today and the work that you do?
So in the beginning, I was born in Vancouver, Washington, and you know, my background until I got into college was just someone. I grew up in a very blue collar family, and neither of my parents went to college, and I was really into sports, and that was just my focus, and that was all I did. And I went to a community college, and somehow, some way, at a community college, I just discovered the transformational quality of education. And it has very distinctly changed my life. I never would have thought about being a college professor way back when I was in high school. I didn't even know what they did. And so I feel so grateful for the educational opportunities that I've had that have helped transform me. And I discovered in college, I went to Oregon State, I discovered I had some skills for counseling. I went on and I got my PhD from the University of Montana in the Department of Psychology, Clinical Psychology program. And just have continued to learn and continue to teach and continue to do counseling or psychotherapy with people for many years. I'd like to say I taught my first class at the University of Montana in 1982. And then I usually like to say, well, so Katrina and Michelle, how old were you two then? Anyway, that's a little bit about my background. And again, I'm grateful to be on this podcast because for myself, how important learning and education has been in my life. And I think it can be for so many people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Sounds like you've had quite the journey. I'm also wondering, one of the big projects that you're involved in that really drew our attention and interest was the Montana Happiness Project. Can you share a little bit about how that came about and what that program is about?
Yeah, well, so it came about, one of my interests from way back in the 20th century has been suicide assessment and treatment, but mostly training professionals to how to do that and how to do that well. And so I published a few things back in the 1990s on that topic, and it has continued to be an area of interest. And probably, somewhere around 5 years ago or so, I was doing quite a few day-long trainings for professionals on that topic. And my wife, who's also a clinical psychologist, and I started talking about how that's just such a negative focus. And it is hard. It's hard to sustain a whole day of that. And I would always try to make it engaging and as fun as possible. But then we decided, well, let's take a look at the other side of a continuum. And so we started to look at some of the positive psychology literature and the literature on happiness, and in particular, evidence-based happiness. And Michelle read a little bit, one of our philosophy statements from the Montana Happiness Project website. And so thank you for that, Michelle. And really what we want to emphasize that people do have some control over their happiness. We define happiness as not smiley happiness, not hedonic or pleasure-based happiness, although that's okay, and we're not against pleasure, but we think that meaning-based happiness, or happiness that's based on you living your best self in your communities, and sometimes your community is a school, sometimes your community is your family, sometimes your community is something bigger. But for us to be able to live our best selves in relationship, we think that that's a really important way to think about happiness. And so the other thing I like to say when I'm talking about the Montana Happiness Project is we do not do toxic positivity. So Katrina and Michelle, I will never say to you, cheer up or smile. Those are terrible things to say.
Yes, I used to have a coworker when I was my first year teaching. I'd walk down the hall, and every single day without fail, that person would say, "Oh, just smile a little more." And I'd be like, "I just don't want to do that right now."
Yeah, you're making me want to punch you, and that's not
Yeah.
good.
Right. Or as bad as telling someone, did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed today?
Yes. Oh,
Worst.
that's terrible.
Yeah, my grandmother would always say that one to me.
Yeah,
Well,
my
and
mother.
and our moods, right? Our moods, our emotions are very personal things. And when people tell us to cheer up or smile, or did you get up on the wrong side of the bed, they're essentially dismissing the important quality of those emotions in our lives. And usually we're feeling something, even if we got up on the wrong side of the bed, we're feeling something for a reason. It's not like, oh, I'm just in a bad mood because I decided to be in a bad mood. It's because there's something going on. And to dismiss that is to disrespect and invalidate our important emotions.
I'm total agreement. So let's take all those important things and turn the focus towards, like, your Happy Schools program. Can you
Yeah.
tell us how that program was created and what its main activities are?
It was created out of my mind. And I'm kind of joking about that, but so there is some literature on a thing called positive education. And positive education, I'm a university professor, and so I want to do things that have some kind of research foundation or science foundation, right? I want it to be based on something. And so positive education, as and I've sort of just used the words happy schools, and then there are two parts to that: happy students and happy teachers. I mean, we could have happy administrators and happy staff, but I'm trying to happy teachers or happy educators. I put into that everyone who's in the school. And what we're trying to do right now, and we have a grant from the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation that has funded us and allowed us to offer low-cost 3-credit graduate courses to teachers around Montana. So we charge $195, and ordinarily to get a 3-credit graduate course through the University of Montana, it might be $1,000 or so. And so we underwrite that cost. We've created it because teachers seem to want it asynchronously, so they can do it a little bit at their own pace. We're doing it that way. That's a little bit hard for me because I like the contact, but they seem to like it. And we try to do a few live episodes during the semester. So that's a big part of what we're doing. And we are teaching teachers, all educators, some evidence-based skills that they can use on themselves, evidence-based happiness skills they can use on themselves, or they could use and apply in their classrooms. We're not requiring them to do anything in their classrooms, although we do ask them to write up a lesson plan just in case they wanted to. That's one of the assignments. But the main focus is teachers have it hard, and we believe that they are disrespected and that they are not appreciated as much and they don't get paid as much as they should. So this is a way for us to offer a course that maybe gets them up the pay scale. And they also learn some skills that they could apply to themselves to live just a little bit happier lives. And that's been going well. That's our happy teachers. That's what we're doing. We also do workshops, and sometimes we'll, come into schools and do, a PIR afternoon for a school or something like that. Maybe just an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe a series. We do all those kinds of things. But the biggest thing we're doing is the 3-credit class.
So a quick follow-up with that 3-credit class that you offer, do they have to be currently working in a school district, I would assume, or is that if they possess a teaching license and maybe in flux?
We have not been very picky. If they identify themselves as a Montana educator, we want them to take the class. We had a person, I think, last year who had been an educator, had retired, and then started being a full-time sub, I think. And, she loved the class. She took complete advantage of it, but she wasn't actually in the classroom the whole time. But she was doing some long-term subbing, and yeah. So we haven't been very picky about that. We want people who are interested and who are Montana educators as loosely as that can be defined for them to feel welcome.
That's great. I know we have a lot of people in a lot of different roles right now across the state with all the turnover that's going on. So it's cool to hear that there are ways to engage in this course.
Yeah. Teachers are our most common population or role in the school that enrolls in the class. And then our second most common are school counselors. We get quite a few school counselors who have enrolled in the class.
So that's a great segue to our next question, which is, can you explain the relationship between self-care and mental health? And how do both of these come together to create happy, healthy individuals?
Yes. One quick thing from the last question, I never mentioned happy students. And so we do offer some small groups for students. We have offered, I think, at one of the middle schools here in Missoula, one of my Montana happiness trainers is going to be doing big presentations for the whole 6th grade, and then the whole 7th grade, and then the whole 8th grade. And then there are going to be like individual classroom presentations as a follow-up to the big presentation. So he's got about 23 little talks that he's going to be giving this fall at one of the middle schools in Missoula. We're also working with the Nate Shute Foundation, which is up in Whitefish, and they're doing a lot more happiness content to go along with their usual suicide prevention stuff. And so those are some things we want to try to complement what we think is maybe an over focus on suicide and depression in schools, and also try to complement that with some happiness content. So that said, self-care, oh, self-care is such an interesting concept. Some people hate it. They just hate the term. Oh, self-care, I hate it. And so I have a few things to say about it. And self-care is one of those things that, as it relates to mental health, we want to think about, first of all, what's the definition of mental health? And people often use the term mental health when they mean mental disorder. I mean, you see people with t-shirts on that say mental health matters. And usually the message that that's giving is that people have mental health problems and they matter, and their experience matters. And I totally agree with that. But that's not really mental health. And mental health, as if you think about it, it has to have a positive definition, because we're talking about health and not disorder or, quote, so-called mental illness, right? And so it involves, it's a multidimensional thing. It involves not only the emotions that we experience being mostly more positive, but also people talk about mental health being people being able to experience and express a wide range of different emotions. And so mental health is also about being able to identify, I feel sad, and to cry and to express it and to be able to have that range of emotions. So there's the emotional quality to be able to have that whole range. And then there's the psychological part of mental health, which probably means having more positive thoughts in our minds than negative. But none of us can get rid of all of our negative voices or our self-criticisms. Some of them come back, from way back in our family and being raised, right? And, to be honest, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I just have to admit that it's really, really hard for anyone to root out and eliminate the negative self-talk that we all do. And so really, mental health doesn't mean I have no negative self-talk. It does mean I cope with it well, right? That I know myself. I have enough self-awareness that I know that certain things are going to activate me or trigger me so that I have some negative thoughts about myself. And so mental health is being able to handle those well. And then mental health has to do with relationships that are mostly supportive and mostly reciprocal, so that we're helping others and connecting with others, in some ways with equality with how much they're helping and being responsive to us, and optimal functioning. Now, self-care is just it's a complicated thing, but we might think about doing it in all the different dimensions. And some people would say, of course, there's the psychological dimension, the emotional dimension, the social dimension, there's the spiritual dimension, there's the physical dimension. And so when we think about self-care, we think about, well, how am I taking care of myself in all these different areas? And then the other tricky thing about self-care is that we're humans, and we often can fool ourselves. And so I might say, I'm doing self-care and I'm going shopping. Well, that may or may not be self-care. I mean, it might make me feel better, but then I might actually feel worse afterwards for certain reasons. And it might be I'm engaging in avoidance, and avoidance is not good self-care. And so one of the things that helps is to be able to check with ourselves and to check with others about, is our self-care really helping us have better mental health? Or sometimes are we defining our self-care as, as lying on the couch for a whole day? And of course, that might be, we might need a break. And so there's, so it's like self-care has to be independently evaluated by each person to figure out, for me, if I laid on a couch all day, I would feel so bad at the end of the day that it would not be good for my mental health. But I know some people who, they feel better after that. So it's very subjective.
Can you tell us a little bit about the common stressors that you notice with educators when you work with them, and going back to the Montana Happiness Happy Schools projects?
Yeah, I was doing a happiness presentation for about 200 educators at a recent event. And, I always try to I get them to talk to each other, and then I'll wander back to the back of the room, when you have that bigger of a group, and I want to know, well, what are they talking about? And I found a couple of coaches, and they're usually not very inspired to talk about whatever it is that I'm trying to get people to talk about. But we got into such a great discussion, and one of them was a wrestling coach, and he said, you'd be surprised at how many people in the world are they really experts on wrestling. And of course, he's being sarcastic, and it's like, but he says, so many parents will tell me I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And it's like, I think maybe I know more about wrestling than they do. And what that really evolved into was how challenging parents are for all educators. And that, I think we've come to a place in our society where parents seem quite ready to criticize teachers, administrators, school counselors, everybody. And so that's a source of stress that I've heard directly from a lot of teachers. Of course, finances is a stress. I just had lunch with a person, coffee or something like that, and she's working with an educator in counseling, and she said, and I have to continue at a very low rate because the educators that I work with don't have great insurance, and they really can't afford a full fee. And so I'm doing mental health counseling at a pro rate. And so finances, it's just a hard thing. And I think the administrators can be difficult. I'm next door to the educational leadership faculty here at the university. They could probably hear me through this wall. I love them, and they do a great job. And yet, I know some administrators are sometimes not as sensitive or flexible or empowering as they might be. At least some of the educators don't see them that way. I think that the system and then the whole kind of social environment, the societal disrespect of teachers, the devaluing of teachers and educators, and for what they do. And I think to myself, I love teachers, and I am amazed at their commitment and their dedication. And so any way that I can try to counteract the negativity that teachers have to experience, that for me has become very important and meaningful, and something I really want to counteract in terms of a stressor that educators have.
Yeah, I think you hit so many accurate points that I think each listener and each educator can connect to. I think another thing that kind of pops up a lot in my experience is having to fill so many roles for your students. Often you're not just their teacher in whatever content area, you're also their counselor, their therapist, you're the person that they come to for breakfast in the morning, or the first line of defense that they have when they make an accusation of a crime or something like that. And so it can cause a heavy cognitive and emotional load on the educators. And then those other elements you just discussed don't really compensate for that, right? To help be therapeutic when they can't go and afford to go see a counselor or therapist, to offset that toll. It's a challenge.
Yeah, that multiple role issue is huge, right? And it's more than we should expect from any single person. I think in the legal profession, they call it parentis and loco or something like that, where because the child is with you as an adult in the school, basically you take on all the duties of a parent all day. And that's, you're often the nurse and the counselor and the educator and the discipline. I mean, it's like, whoa, that is huge.
For 30 kids, right?
For 30 kids.
Yeah. Not even just 2 of your own or, 4 of your own, it's 30.
Yeah, the teachers, educators who can do that well, of course, they're going to suffer some in terms of their own stress, but they're also like they're magic. I've seen a lot of teachers who just do this with 30 kids. And I'm like, I'm in awe. I'm in awe of that. I could make it an hour, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, I'm sorry. I was just thinking that the emotional component of both those kids that you know what they go home to, and but then also the elation when some student does something wonderful or
Yes.
experiences
Yeah.
some- yeah, so just the emotional content is a stressor both ways.
It's a roller coaster.
Mhm.
Yeah, certainly. And I think one of the things we wanted to get your input on is a lot of the times that self-care component kind of comes off as surface level, and there's so many practical barriers where it doesn't apply, right? So we as educators will hear, oh, you need to go on walk breaks during your lunch, or you need to make time to meditate in the morning. And sometimes those things aren't effective practices for us, especially if educators are, doing lunch duty at the same time, or even if they're not and they're just walking around the track and there's an open campus, there are children on the campus that they're monitoring, and they can't turn the teacher brain off.
Right.
So, I think listeners would like to probably hear if there's any effective strategies or tips that you can share for how they protect their mental health and promote their mental health, and their personal self-care for themselves.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. And so usually when people ask me a hard question, I say, let's skip that one. But so again, it's one of those things that you're right. There is no time. There's no time in the school day. And it sounds like, Michelle, one of the things you did when you were an educator is you negotiated directly with your administrator, and you were able to come early and leave at 3, it sounded like 3:30, so that you could be home with your kids, right? Which is a great example of an administrator being flexible. And I'll bet you didn't have much time between 6:30 and 3:30 to really do much self-care. So the truth is, in most cases, there's really not much time, and maybe sometimes it feels like there's no time. And, when it comes to doing self-care during the day, it's very much subjective and individualized, right? I mean, I can imagine, I know some teachers who, if they're walking around the track, they'll turn it into, let's get as many kids walking around the track with me as possible, right? And so teachers need to engage in some self-awareness, and they need to, one of the definitions of extroversion versus introversion, and I always dislike binaries, but there's some truth that people are more extroverted or more introverted, and it's a continuum like everything. But oftentimes people who are extroverted actually gain energy, and they feel like they get more energy when they're around more people. And people who are more introverted feel like that drains away, that being around people drains some of their energy. And so I'd say one self-care tip is to know yourself well enough to know, what strategies can I use during lunch, or if I want to walk around the track, that I can use that fit with what gives me feelings of encouragement and energy and positivity, and what strategies are going to backfire if I try to put on too much. And so I'd say to know that. And really, there's some promising ideas, but one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do who's listening is to think about Michelle offering one of the things that worked for her, and then talk to each other, because you're going to get you're going to get better wisdom from your peers and how they have managed to do a little bit of stress management, a little bit of self-care, weave that into the day. One promising technique that I think some of the teachers are doing, and many maybe are doing it, is weaving in a little bit of self-care into their classroom time with their students. Now, that's a little different, right? Because you're guiding the students and you're monitoring the students, but you might be able to if you make it a regular practice. And of course, it shouldn't take up a huge amount of your class time because you got to do the instructional stuff. But everybody knows that if you got, kids for an hour, you're not going to get 60 minutes of constant work cover in the curriculum. So to figure out things that you can weave into that 60 minutes that's good for you, as well as potentially good for them. I think another thing is, and I'll talk about this later with some maybe just some general tips, is that one of the things that is true about happiness and about affect or positive emotion is that we don't need to have big awe, joy inspiring moments. What seems to be the better antidepressant, if you want to call it that, is to be able to regularly during the day stimulate a little bit of positive affect, positive emotions here and there, and then to lengthen them for as long as you can, knowing that we're all going to return to the difficult, stressful things that we're experiencing. And so finding ways to regularly insert something that's going to improve your emotional state throughout the day, a bunch of little things, that is going to be actually a bigger deal than trying to have the best lunch ever. So that's just another possible tip that shows some promise for some educators.
I think you actually kind of answered the next question that was about more of the introverted teacher in school day, and how they could do something for themselves with students around. Did you have anything else that you could add to that about how they could find that time for themselves to?
Yeah. I think that, I've said this a few times, but self-awareness is really so important. But I'd also combine that with we need to deal with our expectations, right? And so let's say, Michelle, that you decide you're gonna weave in a 3-minute relaxation or mindfulness or positive distraction into every hour of your time with students, right? I think it's easy for us to think about that in theory and romanticize how great it will be. And so part of the self-awareness process is to say, okay, I'm going to do this intentionally. And I'm also going to acknowledge that it's going to backfire most of the time. And so then now my plan will be, what's my best coping strategy for when my wellness strategy fails? Because you don't want the double consequence of you were feeling stressed and then you tried a wellness thing and it didn't work. Now you feel double stressed because that was going to be the thing that was going to make you feel better, right? So I think we have to prepare ourselves for that so that we're realistic. And then if the 3-minute wellness thing works, it's like a little bonus. It's like, oh, it worked. I'm going to savor this 3 minutes. And the other 3-minute plans I made crashed and burned. And that's okay, because I had a strategy for how I would deal with it when I crashed and burned my self-care wellness moment.
That's funny that, because it brings to mind when you were talking about that, I was thinking that I am an introvert. I know, and I'm doing a podcast, doesn't really
that makes sense.
But I did start my daily routine with a prompt with my students, but we played music. And so it was quiet, but that's how everybody kind of start their day and got in gear. And that was my exhale, walk around, observe what they're doing. Anyway, and that was, I think that maybe 3 minutes, like you said, for them to do that writing prompt.
What a great strategy. And it sounds like that became something that you looked forward to and that usually worked because it became a routine in the class. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
I think to your point about the self-care or self-awareness, I'm sorry, self-awareness is that appropriate goal setting comes from that self-awareness, right? Like if it's something you've never done before at all, you
Hmm.
need to set appropriate timetables for that as a teacher so that you're not going, this is the thing I'm committing to, and then the one day you can't do it, you fall off the routine. And then you
Yeah.
get that cycle back of that guilt feeling of, man, it was going so well, and I really bungled this when I stopped it, and now I have to work back into it. And so setting a small goal first of we're going to do this 3 minutes on Mondays or something like that, if that's what that educator needs,
Yeah.
is going to be helpful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying, Katrina, reminds me of the whole concept of SMART goals. And I know a lot of educators know a lot more than I do about SMART goals, but it's so much harder for us to apply those to ourselves. And so really what you're saying is, let's see, I need to be both realistic, but I also need to, make it as small and measurable. And I need to get back on the goal setting if I drop it, it's like, so there are all these things that need to happen along with the SMART goal setting. Again, one of the things I think is just so common is that when something doesn't work, we feel defeated, right? We feel like, oh, well, to be honest, really, most of life is about recovering from failures and being defeated. And so to sort of expect that and say, oh, okay, there it is again. Now, how do I modify my goal so that maybe there's a better chance next time, and yet I will still practice good self-compassion if I fail again.
And as educators, that would be practicing what we preach, right? Children
Totally.
need to fail to learn.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
We don't do that.
Do what I say, not what I do.
Yeah, we talk
No,
about
but
it.
you're absolutely right. I think that's, going back to that comment of we're basically acting in some ways as parents during the day. Part of that is modeling good behaviors and being able to own up to mistakes or to demonstrate what recovering from failure kind of looks like. And that's so impactful to our students.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the most powerful ways that we teach students, right? Is through modeling, through showing. Yeah.
Certainly.
So one thing that we wanted to focus on in this visit was about the setting boundaries component.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that's one of the most difficult things for educators. Boundaries for their students as well as their peers and colleagues, and for that matter, parents. So we know it comes at a cost to their well-being. So if you had some incremental steps beyond what you've already talked to us about of how educators could be more mindful about their time capacity, could you share?
Yeah. Yeah, just a little bit, because that's another difficult question. But before I talked about self-awareness, I talked about consulting with other educators, right? And so to know yourself, to consult with others. And I had a third thought, and it's just slipping out of my brain right now. So one of the things when we set boundaries, and this is just an important thing to keep in mind, is that we can set boundaries with kindness and empathy. And really, that might be another thing that, it's one of the things I used to teach parents a lot, because I was the director of a parenting education organization for about 8 years. And it was like, you can say no to kids, to your kids, to the students, and do it in sort of a stern way. And then sometimes you get pushback because the student doesn't feel good about that boundary that got set, and then they become more likely to violate it. Or you can be clear and firm and kind and empathic. One of the famous writers about how to do that used to say, you can give the child what they want in the form of a wish. You can say, yeah, I wish I had more time. I wish you could join me on the track as I walk around. And and they would say, try to avoid the but language. And yet, I need this time to myself also. For me, that's doing what Katrina said a moment ago about is modeling, right? You're modeling how do you set boundaries that are firm, but also empathic, also kind, because you know that the kids want something from you. How do you turn them down in a way that's not going to push their buttons, but instead will give them, oh, you know, Mrs. McCarthy isn't saying no because she doesn't like me. She gave me a limit, but she also helped me understand what that was about. So that's another idea that I think might be helpful.
Yeah,
And
I think
modeling how to take care of yourself. So,
yes. I think you're absolutely right. One of the things I used to do with my students was I was clear from the beginning the days that I could stay late and the days that I could not, because I was, obligated to go pick up my daughter, and I was the one doing that. So being upfront about that actually helped when my students would approach me and say, hey, Miss Ingeldrum, can you stay late and help me work on these assignments I'm missing? And I could say, wow, I understand that you're really stressed about this. Would you like me to send, or I don't stay late on these days. We can do this on Wednesday. Would you like me to send an email to your parents, knowing that their parents are kind of probably applying this pressure to say that you spoke to me and we made a plan and we're, going to move forward with that. And I think you can, like you said, you can be firm and say, we're not doing this today, but you can also acknowledge that they're coming to that conversation with feelings as well. And that you do want to support them in those feelings, but in a way that also protects your own agency and needs.
Yeah. I'm sometimes when I think about that, I think of my own experience of people saying no to me. And one that always comes up in my mind, it happened years ago, but I went to the University of Montana gym like almost every day. And we have our cards that we need to get in. And one day, like out of whatever number, I forgot my card and I wanted to go in. And the person said, I said, oh, I forgot my card. No. And there was like, no, it wasn't no, I'm sorry, or no, I wish I could let you in, but they're really monitoring. It was just no. And I remember feeling this anger. It's like, and you put it really well, Katrina, in that I had a need, right? And your students have a need that they're approaching you with. And if you can be kind and sensitive to that need, but still say no and still have your boundary, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, certainly. And it is really hard. Students, I think, sometimes give a little more grace because they often understand that they see what you do in your room, right? Like they're seeing you modeling all these things going on. And I think sometimes administrators or other educators or parents can sometimes be the more challenging ones to set boundaries with, but the application is still the same, of acknowledging what they're bringing to the table and what they require, sharing what you require, and then moving forward with a plan. It really is a model that works for most people. Some people you'll get some pushback, I think, but they're a whole other ballgame of individual.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to skip around a little bit so that we can, get to the meat of what I feel like is our main priority of wanting to get from you today. But can you, we talked a lot about the stresses that educators encounter and some of the burden that can cause. And so I'm hoping that you can share with us some of the signs that an educator may need to seek more help, and how they may recognize that they're reaching a critical point in their mental health and need to seek assistance.
Yeah, one guideline is if you're starting to wonder, if you're starting to wonder, am I okay? To reach out to someone there's this old Far Side cartoon that my wife and I used to show when we're presenting, and it's a duck that's sinking, and you know you can see the duck is lower in the water and is looking around, and it says, "Hey Bob, am I sinking?" You know, and you know obviously the duck is sinking, and so sometimes if you start to think you are and you wonder about it, that's a time to not be defensive, because most people have been there where they feel like they're sinking in terms of their well-being is sinking. You know, and if you can work on that self-awareness and you notice your distress is up and your ability to feel positive feelings is down, okay, and both those things seem to be going in the wrong direction, you know, most of us can only sustain that for so long, and then something needs to change. And so again, that self-awareness is a big piece of it. And I'm adding to that, check with your colleagues sometimes. It's like, am I doing okay? Or even share, I'm struggling a bit, and it would be great to talk about it. Because, you know, I had one of my long-term psychotherapy clients who said to me once, the mind is a terrible place to go alone. And really, I think what he was speaking to is that we can all get ourselves into a negative spiral and get into dark places. And so we shouldn't go there alone, or we should recognize that if we go there alone, we might want to reach out at some point, because we could get ourselves spinning down into a really negative place. The other piece of that is we want to watch for distress going up. We want to watch for positive emotions going down. And the third really big thing to watch for, and you know, this is you could put this in the spiritual domain, but also in the social domain, but just feeling cut off, feeling disconnected from other people. But it also could be disconnected from your usual whatever meaningful, either religious or social justice thing that you have felt like it is motivating for you. When you start to feel disconnected from that for one reason or another, those are some things to be aware of too. So social disconnection, sort of a spiritual or meaning disconnection. Yeah, those are really things that we should be monitoring ourselves for. And when they start to fall out of what's normal for us, worth checking in with someone.
Thank you for sharing all those things. I think
I was just
that's a
thinking
message.
at work, we would say, nothing's filling your cup, right? As opposed to what can I do to help you fill your cup, which our supervisors say, because they're pretty good people.
Well, and when people are experiencing clinical depression, let's say, okay, a lot of times when they say, you know, when somebody asks them what could fill your cup, they'll say nothing could fill my cup. I've got a leak in my cup, and I cannot imagine anything filling my. Or they might say, I've tried everything, and nothing helps. And when that happens, a lot of times that's sort of the depression talking, because people who are feeling really depressed and down, and all the things that go with that, they get a kind of a mental constriction. It's hard to remember when the cup was filled up. It's hard to remember the things that made the cup fill up. And sure, it might be a tougher thing to do to fill up that cup. But often, if people are able to make the efforts to fill it up again anyway, it's sort of like our emotions sometimes follow our behavior, and we have to just start, you know, if bowling with your buddies on Wednesday night, you know, used to make you feel good, you might just need to go back to that and not have it feel good for a month. And then maybe something will come back, a spark. Yeah.
That's really, really excellent points. So as we start to wrap up, we went a little over, but it was totally worth it. Could you tell us what's next in your research or what projects you're excited about?
Yes, I should have warned you that I'm a college professor and I talk a lot. And so this is what happens, and I apologize, but you know, anyway.
You're in good company.
Yeah, well, you've talked, but I've talked more. But I really appreciate hearing your perspectives, because talking in isolation is just not a good thing. And so having you sort of reflect some of the words back and some of the ideas and offer your own ideas, to me, a conversation is way better than a monologue. But what's exciting next is we have collected data on, we've done three credit classes, and we've collected data on those. We also collected data on a short series of workshops that we had about 400 people take. So, but for our three credit classes, we've got a total population, or a total sample, of 156 Montana educators. And what we found, and this is exciting to me, I'm a nerd, what we found was, entering the class, 32% of them were experiencing symptoms consistent with clinical depression. That's not good news. What we found afterwards was about 12%. And so the number went down a lot. And, I'd like to attribute it to the class. And this is pretty good research, because we've done 3 different groups. We have not got a control group, and so it's not perfect research, but the repetition of doing it 3 times in 3 slightly different formats, the results have been almost exactly the same each time. And depression is only one of the things that went down. Also, hope went up. Also, unbelievably, physical health got better. Days sick went down. Number or frequency of headaches went down. Sleep got better. Gastrointestinal symptoms were fewer. It's like all across, every single one of our physical health measures got better. And at the statistically significant level, right, which nerds like to monitor, but also I think at the meaningful, I can feel a difference level, because the teachers, many of them directly attributed the benefits that they were experiencing to the class. So we're going to continue doing that class, and that's one way I would love to have your help, because it's one of the things that we offer. It's pretty cheap. It's not an easy class. I like to joke at the beginning, this is the hardest 3 credits you'll ever take, because you have to focus on yourself and you got to work on some things. And we give you a lot of assignments to try. Gratitude, savoring, acts of kindness, goal setting, and forgiveness. We have all these different, we have about, if people want to, you can go to our website and find 20 evidence-based happiness challenge assignments. And we weave most of those into our class.
That sounds incredible. Congratulations on those results.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we're in the process of writing it up now, and that's exciting too.
That's wonderful. And it shows how everything's interrelated, right? It's not just nothing exists in a compartment. So for anybody who's interested in getting in touch with you, taking this class, any and all of the above things, how would they go about getting a visit to their schools or getting connected with you and your work?
Yeah, probably the easiest direct way is through the Montana Happiness Project. And we're at montanahappiness.org. No, .org. I don't know, .com. It's one of those. And then I also have my own personal website, which I just post and give out free things on. And that's johnsommersflanagan.com, and no hyphen, just johnsommersflanaganaltogether.com. I'm also a professor at the University of Montana. And so you can always find me, go to the University of Montana or just type in my name. There's very few people. And yeah, I won't always be the one who comes to a school and does all the presentations. We have a team, a small team, but growing. And we want to get out to schools, and we want to support educators, and we want to support the system. And so, yeah, so we're excited to have requests, and we would like to fulfill them all. We try to do that. And obviously, there's just so many of us and so much time, but yeah.
You have to set those boundaries.
Sometimes we have to take care of ourselves, Michelle. I don't know if you know that, but yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, she flipped it on you there.
I know she did. I know, that's why I was trying to use a funny voice to say, yeah. You're right. You're right, Michelle.
So last question we have for you is, what do you want to leave as the final message here with our educators, and critical element about their self-care, happiness, agency, and self-awareness, and all those wonderful things we've spoken about today?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that life is hard. Being an educator is hard. Trauma is real in that people experience hard things in their lives. And through all that, I guess two things. One is try to develop some frequent positive sparks of positive emotions, right? And then the other thing I want to leave people with is there was a famous positive psychologist who used to do these lectures, and he would tell people, I can do my lecture for you in 5 seconds if you'd like, or you can come to the hour-long version. And they'd say, well, what is it? Tell us. And he'd say, other people matter. Period. That's the end of my lecture. And then he would sometimes add, and I like the second part too, he would say, and we are all other people to everyone else. I mean, and to me, that speaks for, we're living in community, right? And we're living with other teachers, we're living with other administrators, we're living with other people who are preparing school lunches. And it's important for us to support each other and have those mutually supportive relationships. And I think the more we can focus on that and contributing to the community, the healthier the whole community can be.
100%. I agree entirely. Community is so important. And it's something I feel we're losing as a society a little bit. But that's a whole other avenue we could go down.
That's a new podcast.
Yeah, that's a new podcast episode right there. Thank you so much for sharing with us today and speaking to us. I hope that educators who are listening to this can get something out of it to take home and inform their own practice as educators. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
As we close out our discussion on educator self-care and reflect back on the insights that John shared with us today, what is one strategy that you want to apply to your life that will help you preserve yourself and give your students the best of you?
We hope that you'll join us in our next episode, where we will explore educator retention through a different lens, not necessarily that self-care and mental health avenue, but also leveraging the practice of high-quality mentorship programs.
Mentoring should be a fulfilling relationship between somebody with more experience and somebody with less. And the goal of helping both individuals becomes elevated versions of themselves. This is a quote from Janice Amadiki. I'm not positive on that pronunciation. Next month, we will hear from an individual who is instrumental in the development of a hometown mentorship program that applied this theory to action in Polson, Montana.
We hope that until then, you will consider how the educators in your life molded your experience in education and how you can positively support others in a spirit of reciprocal growth. If you're wondering how to leverage these podcast experiences for professional development, please remember that we've offered an independent and collaborative listener guide that will instruct you on how to get professional development unit certificates for participating and listening in these podcasts. We also offer some professional learning hub courses on the Teacher Learning Hub on some related topics. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please visit the Relationship Building and Self-Care in Rural or Tribal Settings course, which is a 3 PDUs, or the Dealing with Grief and Loss in Adolescence, which is a 2 PDU course.
If you'd like to recommend topics for future episodes, please fill out the Qualtrics form linked in the bio and in the listener guides that were mentioned by Katrina.
We're so thankful that you've joined us in this experimental learning platform, and we hope that you'll join us for our next episode of the Last Best Learning Podcast.
Thank you.